The focal point of any miniature should be the face. It's what draws our attention when we first look at the miniature, faces and bases. If you get those two things right, you will be on to a very strong start and finish to your miniature. So, and with a face this amazingly sculpted, you want to put in a bit of effort. So with my Horuses up to date, I've always had a bit of a red underglow to them. I don't want anything too aggressive to make him look particularly evil. I just want a nice malevolent red undercoat. So I'm using Blood Red from scale 75, airbrushed at around 15 psi, mixed up with some Forge World thinner, and I'm airbrushing this into the recess of Horus's armour. I don't need any white, I don't need any pre-shading, I want this to look quite dark and forbidding. To start with the face, I've mixed Rust and Bronze Flesh Tone, both from the Scale 75 Air set. I'll be adding 2 to 3 layers to create a consistent base coat on the miniature. I'm using pure Bronze Flesh Tone directly from above in a zenithal highlighting technique to create an artificial highlight. Next, I've mixed Pale Flesh into the Bronze Flesh mixture I had previously, and I'm using this, and again in the zenithal highlighting technique, to have a greater lightness towards the top of his head. So pay attention to where I airbrush, or what angle I use the airbrush, just to pick up on the highest points of light on his head. Next stage, I have Incubi Darkness, and these will be used to place the shadow on the face. Because our light source is coming from underneath the chin, our shadows need to be on the top of the forehead, behind his ears, up on the top portion, just behind, in front of his ears, behind his eyes, and on the cheek. Oh, and that's me dropping him. The reason why we're using blue is that it neatly counters, or neatly complements the red underglow of the head. Okay, I'm using Bloody Red from scale 75. I'm washing this quite the way down. You can see the consistency through the airbrush. That's what we're looking for. I'll be spraying this directly from below. Now I've added a touch of Hot Orange by Vallejo. I'll be going through the same process again, heightening the contrast. I need to re-establish the mid-tones at this point. Most of the face is covered with red and it doesn't look very natural. So I'm using bronze flesh tone, watered down to a wash-like consistency, directly from above, just to add a more human tones to the upper reaches of his face. And it will also bring out the red underglow. I need to re-highlight the head, so I'm using pale flesh again in a zenithal highlighting scheme directly on top of the miniature to create a more naturalistic, warmer skin tone. I've added some white into the pale flesh tone and I'm airbrushing directly from below to give that sense of a light source beneath his chin. I'll need to re-establish the red because we have knocked it back quite a bit. So I'm using blood red. I've added thinner to create a wash-like consistency. I'll use 2 to 3 very thin layers directly from below to re-establish that hellish red underglow to the skin. So the airbrushing process is only half the battle. Once we've airbrushed the initial layers, we need to attach the head. This will give us a greater understanding of where the lights and shadows would naturally fall on the miniature's face. So from here, I want to develop the red tones, I want to develop the skin tones, I just want to develop everything about the face, tightening things up, getting those shadows in place, and really giving a sense of character. So I've gone in with Inky Darkness, and as you can see, it's quite a wash-like consistency, to bring out those features of the face I want to emphasize. If you don't want him to look as angry, don't place this don't place this color around those frown marks on the head. If you want something slightly more nuanced and balanced, if you don't want to make him look so brooding or angry, you can use a brown or a very dark brown color rather than the blue. I'm using pale flesh tone again for the upper highlights on the face. I'm not too worried at this point about the blending process. I just want to establish where my highest points of light will be, and then with several successive layers of acrylic wash, so I could take a flesh skin tone and wash it down and then overlay it. That will help smooth out the blend, but for this portion I'm just locating my highest points of light and adding it to the miniature's face. Here I've taken bronzed flesh tone I've washed it right the way down to a wash-like consistency, and I'm overlaying this on the highlight to the upper mid-tone. This should cover the bright white spots we've placed on the cheeks and the forehead previously, as well as drawing it into the upper edges of the mid-tone. So we're starting to develop the mid-tone and soften those harsh, garish highlights. Again, I've come in with some pale flesh tone to re-establish the lights, and from here I'll be moving between the two. You can see I've softened the blend. I've added it initially to the skin tone, and then with the belly of the brush and the way I manipulate the brush on top of the miniature, I can blend it in. So don't worry about highlighting or having the highlight too garish, because you can always pull it back with that previous wash layer with the bronze flesh. Okay, the next step, we need to take some Vermilion by VMC, Vallejo model color. I'm just adding this almost like eyeshadow to him. So that's where the highest points of light, that's where the most intensely saturated points of light from underneath would occur. His cheekbone, just along his cheek, underneath his eyes. And then I'm further developing that with hot orange. So I'm just using Vermilion to heighten the red saturation points that's occurring underneath the gorget. Gorget or gorget, do you pronounce the T? I'm just running this around his face to further heighten the saturated red. So I'm being a lot more focused in where I place my inky darkness here. It's no longer a wash, it's more of a targeted shadow. Underneath the eyes, on top of, I want him to look slightly angry, I want him to look pissed off, so that goes around the frown marks, the anger marks around the top of his head, just underneath his cheeks and his mouth. This gives further definition to the miniature, and it also helps with the colour psychology of the piece. Instead of using brown, we're using blue to show he has a slightly more intemperate nature. Using Scuffrillus Brown, I wonder how long it's going to be before I can pronounce that properly. I am adding dots of light to make it almost seem like there's an inferno heat underneath his gorget. It's not just a red light, it's almost the cinders of a great fire. So that's why I'm adding those slight dots in a pointillism technique, just to those highest points of light that would naturally catch from his underglow. I want a slightly greater contrast for the side of his face. So I've come in with some inky darkness, and I'm going to leave this quite stark in contrast to the rest of the facial features. So I've just added a touch, and I'm blending it in with the brush. So the blue looks slightly unnatural. I want to tone it back a little bit, so I'm using black leather from the Scale 75 set, the wooden leather. Again, wash-like consistency. I'm running this over all the blue greeny portions of the skin, hopefully to knock it back and give it a slightly more natural appearance, but you'll still see it there in the underlying tone of the colour. It will deepen the shadow more than just using a black scene. It will give us much more colour interest rather than just using black or brown on its own. From here I'll be tidying up the skin. The shades, the tonal values, they're all established, they're all where I want them to be. I just want to go in with bronze flesh and pale skin tone, moving between these two colours just to give greater definition around the frown marks, top of his eyes, top of his nose and the top of his mouth, and correct any mistakes. And don't worry, if you've been looking at that spot to the back of his head that I haven't painted, don't worry, I picked it up in post-production. For the eyes, I blacklined the eyes completely, then I added ivory on the top of them, and then I washed them with Scuffrelous Brown to give that hellish, malevolent look to his eyes. So I'm being very brave here and trying to get the eyes on camera. So because this is all filmed on camera, it's quite far away from me as I paint. I can't remember whether I got these exactly. You can see a few slips here and there, which will all be corrected when I haven't got a camera between me and the miniature. So I think we did manage to get the eyes done here. Yep. So I've used just black to put in the eyes, and then you can use a white on it underneath, which I've done here, to give that reflection from underneath, which didn't turn out great. He looks a bit cockeyed now, but that's the basic premise. You put a black down first, and then you can use a secondary colour, especially miniatures this large. You can take a white, or in my case a Scuffrelous Brown, mixed in with white, and added a dot underneath his eye to give that secondary point of reflection. So this is me fiddling with the eyes, trying to get them perfect. But I did change them post, just to make sure that they were accurate and the client was happy with them. But that's how that's how I did a Horus's face. Again, I'd like to take this time to thank each and every one of you who have supported the Patreon. Without you, these kind of tutorials would not be possible. I just wouldn't have the financial resources to do it. So thank you very much. If you do manage to paint anything based off the back of this tutorial, please post up images, and even better if you could post them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and link them to the Patreon page. It helps so much in spreading the word and bringing more people in. Thank you so much. Bye bye.